development is such a building block of skills that it can kind of throw our babies off if we try to work on something that their body hasn't yet developed the strength or stability or coordination. The first 6 months are super important to develop a nice round head, and it's very easy to get flatness if they come out and always want to look over to the right. And then over time it gets worse and worse because they're naturally being drawn to that position. Screens really shouldn't be a part of your baby's day-to-day life until 2 years old because the brain is so actively developing. And
Laurel, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. Everyone, this is Laurel. She is the founder and creator of Little Roos Pediatric Therapy, as well as the creator of Purposeful Play with Babies. Laurel, why don't you take a moment and just introduce yourself and tell us about what it is that you offer?
Sure. So thanks for having me, Chris. So like you said, my name's Laurel. I am an occupational therapist by training, and that has been my entire professional background. About 2.5 years ago, I decided to start my own business, Little Roos, which we specialize in infant and pediatric development for one-on-one therapy and group wellness classes in the Phoenix, Scottsdale, and a little bit in the Tucson area of Arizona as well. And then we also created Purposeful Play with Babies about a year ago, which is an online course and allows access worldwide to infant development resources and how to best support your baby from those early stages so they can continue to thrive and you feel confident as a parent knowing what to do.
Awesome. So as we dive in, what made you decide to go into pediatric therapy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always wanted to work with kids since I was young, and was drawn to medicine and helping people, but really was looking for a career where I could get to know my families and my patients, help make an impact in their life, and something that was flexible as well and had a variety of opportunities, and you didn't get too pigeonholed into something. So during college, I kind of was on the pre-health, pre-med track and decided and was looking at some other type of things like physician's assistant or nurse practitioner or things like that, and decided that therapy was really the route I wanted to go. It was from advice from a pre-health advisor, though, that directed me towards occupational therapy. And occupational therapy is, the name can be a bit misleading, but basically the premise of it is utilizing occupations or things that fulfill your day-to-day life in order to support your therapy and also get you back to your occupations or things that you want to be doing with your time. So with infants and children, it's all through play because that's what they should be doing and utilizing play for development. So it just seemed like the perfect mix for me from a health standpoint. You have the medical background, you get to know your families, you can make an impact. And that's kind of what led me then to the program at University of Southern California, which is a great program for OT after college for grad school. And then from that point on, I knew I wanted to work with kiddos. So I started at a hospital here in their outpatient pediatric therapy and then went into the neonatal ICU and then saw the point for better care in our community for those infants specifically and started Little Roos.
Now, I don't have kids, so there's going to be a lot of questions on my end that
Sure.
come from just the not having the knowledge of children. I've been around little kids. My little brother just had his first baby girl, and I am always so nervous, and I'm sure a lot of new parents of newborns is how fragile are babies in reality, because it's always like I'm so nervous to hold my little niece, and I was trying to hold her head, and then I'm feeling awkward. But are babies as fragile as we think they are initially?
They are fragile because their bodies are so fresh, but at the same time, I think they're more resilient than we give them credit for sometimes. they are actively developing all of their senses and their muscles from the moment they come out of the womb, and learning how to confidently and comfortably handle babies is something that takes time and effort, and I think over time you get more comfortable with, for sure. So I would say they are fragile, but there are also ways to help support their development from the beginning, and utilizing those tools that you can gain with practice and learning and whatnot, so that you can feel comfortable, but also you can help support their development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So with what you offer through Purposeful Play with Babies, mm-hmm. that is focused on the parent's interaction with the child. Can you break that down a little bit for us?
Sure. So it is focused, on the parent's confidence and comfort with their baby's development. It's really focused on that early motor development to start for those first 6 months, because so often we get these questions as therapists, like, well, what should we be doing with our baby, or what is expected at this age range, or when should I expect them to do this? And I found that it can lead to a lot of kind of anxiety with the unknown of, like, I don't know when they should be doing it or how I can even help them get there if it seems like they're having a little difficulty or just need more time. So that was kind of the reasoning behind the course. And what the course looks like is it's for 0 to 6 months, and it's broken down by 2-month segments. So 0 to 2 months, 2 to 4 months, and 4 to 6 months. Within each segment is a skill set. So there's things like tummy time, rolling, sensory regulation, head control, head shaping, things like that. All of these things that are kind of areas of development that we want to be supporting in those early stages, and how we can do them. So each subsection has those skills broken down, and then within each of those subsections, there's a video. And the video is first just talking of why the skill is important, what they should be doing, the anticipated milestones, and then secondly, our demonstrations with real babies that range in that age range, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. So the idea is that it's easily accessible. You can kind of decide what you want to focus on based on your baby's skill and your baby's age. And then it's also made so that you don't have to sit down and watch it like in your own time, but you could put it to the side, listen and watch, and then have your baby and be practicing simultaneously.
So what do you do if your child is either advancing or not moving through the program as fast? Mm-hmm. Do you just want to stay back and kind of focused on the earlier stages and really work in that developmental side, or just progress even because your baby's now 2 months old and you should be in the 2-month-old section?
So I always suggest accomplishing the skill before moving to the next one. Development is such a building block of skills that it can kind of throw our babies off if we try to work on something that their body hasn't yet developed the strength or stability or coordination or any of those things to get to the next stage. So, like, for example, with tummy time, if our baby can't hold their head up with their arms propped forward, like, consistently, but then we're at the 4 to 6 month video and we're trying to work on straight arm tummy time, the baby isn't going to have the chest strength for that, the shoulder stability, the back, the neck, or the overall head control. So it really wouldn't be fruitful to be working on that when you haven't built up the strength, just like when we exercise and stuff. But with that being said, too, if you ever have concerns like your baby isn't progressing, the best thing to do is chat with your pediatrician and do more one-on-one therapy versus just general wellness, because a lot of those things are so easy to take care of early on. So, yeah.
That leads into my next question is, what are some things in those first 6 months of development that parents should be looking out for as like a warning sign or something that they should be cautious of what's going on with their child?
Sure. That's a great question. So one of the big things is I always encourage parents to look at their own child and try not to compare to others, because development is such a wide range. Most of the motor skills have a 2-month window and when it's considered typical. So not trying to compare to others, but watching your baby's own progress and seeing that improvement in strength, coordination, endurance, awareness, and seeing that upward slope. Your days might go up and down, but generally speaking, you have an upward progression of skill. So that's a big one. Secondly, if you have an intuition that something's not right or you want reassurance that everything is okay, that can be enough to just go do an evaluation. I think therapy has the connotation that something has to be very wrong to go do it. And that's one big area that I'm trying to shift with the purposeful play and just with our business in general is sometimes we're there to support your baby's development and support you as a parent so you guys can both thrive together. And giving parents that check-in or reassurance can be, or plan, like home program for what the next month should look like, can be so helpful for both the parents and babies. A few other early things is if your baby isn't feeding well, that's where a lot of times therapy and some other supplemental resources can help. If your baby comes out with a head turn preference, so in utero, they're nice and snug, and often they get in one position and they are very comfortable there, and that's how their neck develops. And then they come out and gravity brings them right to that spot. And over time, because their heads are so moldable from early on, because they have to be birthed and then their head has to grow with their brain, the first 6 months are super important to develop a nice round head. And it's very easy to get flatness if they come out and always want to look over to the right. And then over time, it gets worse and worse because they're naturally being drawn to that position. So something like that is something I always talk to my new mom groups about because it's so easy as a therapist to take care of early on. And over time, it just gets harder and harder. The head isn't molding as much. The neck has turned into like a preferred motor pattern versus just tightness. And you have to retrain the body how to move versus just address the underlying cause. So those are some of the big ones. But there's, if as a parent, if you have concerns, they should be validated and they should be supported to get support for you and for your baby. So there's nothing wrong with seeking out a little additional support and getting that kind of guidance early on too.
That's crazy. That's something I didn't know about the baby wanting to only turn its head one way and developing flat spots on their head. That it makes sense when you think about it, but as somebody who's very uninformed about young children, I just wouldn't have thought of that. So
well, and if you guys have ever seen like a baby out and about and they have a little white kind of helmet on, that's a cranial remolding helmet. And so that's when we've gotten to the point where we can't change it with just therapy, usually after about 6 months. And so they have to wear a helmet that gently puts pressure on their head to remold it into a like round position. And I get asked a lot about that. Well, like, isn't it just cosmetic with a flat head shape? And there is a cosmetic component with the head shape and symmetry, but there's also a huge developmental component with the way our brain forms. It's supposed to be in a round spherical object. It can also, if you have flatness on one side or directly on the back, it can push forward and impact your jaw on that side, which impacts how your teeth come in. It can impact the ear canal on that side because it flattens it, so you get more ear infections. It can impact vision because that eye is more forward than the other. It can impact like headaches and things like that if you have a lot of pressure on your upper neck, lower head. And then also long term with like helmets. We want helmets to fit our kids well and prevent injuries. So for things like riding a bike or sports and stuff too, helmets are made to be on a round head.
Wow, I'm blown away. I didn't realize there was so much that went into that initial development, which leads me to my next question is how you've expressed some of it, but how important is that initial 6 months of the baby's development, not just on what you talked about their head, but as well as developing some of those motor skills and things that you teach?
Oh yeah, I mean it's everything. It's that time frame where, they're sleeping a lot too, especially at first, so we have minimal wake windows to work with. So we want them to be very purposeful. And it's all of those building blocks for their long-term development. So things like head control lead to shaping the head, of course, but then it also leads to being able to look around a room and visually track things. And their visual system isn't developed at birth. It is how our vision is 20/20, theirs is 20/400. So it's a big blurry world, and the way it develops is from input. And so you need head control to explore that input for your brain to develop so that that sensory system can develop. Same thing with like tummy time. You start very slowly and gently. It's always gentle too. That's another big part of my approach is I'm never going to push a kid to do something that they're telling me they're not comfortable with. They're communicating that in a baby way, but they're communicating it, and we're going to figure out how to help them in ways that are comfortable. So for tummy time, at first you're just learning to barely lift your head and clear your airway. But over time, that develops into strengthening of the chest, the shoulders, the neck, and the back, which lead to things like being able to get your first mobility, which is rolling, and then being able to pivot on your belly, and then getting enough upper body strength to go onto those straight arms for things like crawling, which crawling leads to walking, which walking leads to exploring your environment and developing your safety awareness, body awareness, social skills, all of those things. So it's, the starting point of those first 6 months, while a lot of it is also focused on good sleep, good feeding, and all of that, those times where we do have our wake windows, we want to really be able to use them well and purposefully to help with their development from the get-go.
I've got to imagine, too, that taking that time that the baby is awake and being very intentional with it has got to help a lot as far as developing the relationship between the child and the parent.
Totally.
And I'm going to guess, I don't know, you may know if there's data that supports this, that then helps set up that relationship for later in life.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine that not taking that intentional time where I see there's a lot of toys and things out there that are designed to put your baby here while they're awake and you go do things and this will keep your baby distracted. Whereas I feel like what you're offering is really on purposeful play with babies, designed to get you interacting with your child and growing that relationship and bond. Exactly.
And yeah, there is very solid research on, the bond from the beginning. There's some interesting things. This is kind of a little bit different, but on dads that take paternity leave and their long-term bonding relationship from spending that early time with their baby. This is also teaching your baby to be comfortable playing on the floor and start to learn how their body is connected and learn how their body moves, because long-term, we do want to be able to put them down and have them be able to play by themselves for short durations. But I want to be able to put them down in a play space, like an open floor time space, not need to go in a standard thing with a bunch of bright toys around them and something that's passive. The best spot for your baby is on the floor. And sometimes that's not always an option, but then utilizing the knowledge and skills you have to match their independent skill level to what we're putting them in is the most important thing. Because often when we put them in things like a stander when they're not even sitting yet, it impacts their development and their bodies in ways that then create problems in developing the skill, if that makes sense.
You were talking about the father and taking paternity leave. How How important is the dad versus mom as far as in those early stages of development on the child?
Sure. I mean, it's so important to have both partners involved and bonding with the baby. Naturally, mom is there more from a feeding perspective, from a birthing perspective, from they've also had 9 months to start to feel bonded to the child and feel the baby move and spend might sound silly to some people, but spend time together. Like they are constantly together, and you start to feel the kicks around 20 weeks. And so you and your baby are there, and they've heard your voice too, and they have actively absorbed your voice into their brain development. So with the partner, there are so many important roles that they can take on, even though the woman's body is more naturally, in those roles because they're there to feed and whatnot. But, taking the time where this might be dad's thing is to get down on the floor and play with the baby, or reading to them, because reading is so important from the beginning, reading and talking. It's a huge part of development for their brain. So reading those 5 books a day to the baby, or you do the nighttime feed with a bottle, or things like that, and finding your groove as partners in ways that can then enhance your baby's development and also enhance everyone's relationship with the baby.
You've talked now about we have the purposeful play with your baby, but you just mentioned reading. Is there any other things that people should be doing that are really important with their child besides the 2 that we've kind of covered?
So purposeful play with babies kind of outlines the early motor and overall development. And I think we touched on reading and talking to your babies, but that's just part of language development. And also, as the brain is so actively developing in those first 3 years, that passive flood of information, like quantity and quality of words, is so helpful for their language development, but also things like reasoning skills, social skills, even mathematical skills. So that's kind of part of development as a whole. Obviously, the basic needs being met with feeding, sleeping, all of that. I really love baby wearing, so that's where a wrap or a carrier that you can hold your baby against you. And then they can get some passive tummy time that way. A lot of times babies sleep very well that way. You can get stuff done while they're sleeping, and it can be a nice way for bonding too. Early on too, skin to skin. So that's where the baby rests directly on the skin when they just have their diaper on or whatnot. It has really positive effects for bonding and development as well. There's a number of things that I often talk about of what not to do for your early development. And that's utilizing kind of those baby containers or things that put them in positions that their body isn't yet ready for. As I am around a lot of parents, and I totally understand that sometimes we need them to go somewhere if we're, have to do something like we do, and they aren't settled on the floor, we can't hold them, whatnot. You can use them purposefully. And like I said a little bit earlier, matching your baby's independent skill level to what we're putting them in is the most important thing, and then not utilizing them for too much time. So that's a big one that I see that often impacts development. And then screen time is another one. Screens really shouldn't be a part of your baby's day-to-day life until 2 years old, because the brain is so actively developing and it's so stimulating from both a visual and auditory perspective that as the brain is developing, and if there is that regular exposure, it's developing in a way that that's the amount of stimulation they need to sustain their attention, versus a crinkle book or a piece of paper or things like that are equally as entertaining. But if we've been used to having these ever-changing visual screens, it's not that it's not entertaining, it does not sustain their attention. A lot of parents I hear say but they just love it so much. And it isn't really that they love it, it's that they're not neurologically mature enough to not look at it when something like that is on. And that's just through guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics, but it's something anecdotally that as therapists, a lot of us have seen, that kids that have been exposed to screen time earlier often have some of those attention difficulties. One thing really quick, though, while I'm on that topic, the AAP does differentiate with FaceTime with family members, and they say that that's okay to help build social connections, because although it is a screen, it's one or two faces, just with a voice, has, facial reactions, and then you also have a parent kind of guiding it with you. So there is a differentiation there.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. To stay on this topic of overstimulation, mm-hmm. is there a lot of baby toys that I see and interact that have colors and sounds and motions and is there an age where you had mentioned earlier that you would want your child being able to play in a big play area with not a lot of colors and shapes and stuff yet? So in those early stages of development, you really don't want to try and overstimulate mm-hmm. the baby? Is that what I was gathering from that?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely still use toys and whatnot, but those early stages, I tend to stick to like a gentle little rattle toy that is lightweight and they can kind of wrap their fingers around. Or there's like this cute little wheel that spins and it just makes a nice little rattle. Mirrors are great. They love looking at themselves and you can get them nice and close. Contrast cards, so they're like black and white little cards, and really, since their visual system is so fresh, they can see that versus some other stuff they can't see. So yeah, I tend to early on just utilize things that have them look at themselves, are easy, simple, nothing too overstimulating. And then as they get older, a lot of times with other toys, once they start interacting, like I'll start with the batteries out or the power off, and they just like hitting it and hearing the buttons, and they're still colorful, but they're not getting then that bright light and music and all of that changing. So that's always an option. And then as they get older and more mature and ready for it, you could put it on or put batteries in. But the biggest thing is to really watch your baby's response. If they're just zoned out on it and like nothing's fazing them, or they're just so glued to it or bright-eyed and they physically look overstimulated, it's probably too much.
So you'd mentioned that babies have very blurry vision when they come out of the oven. When does their vision start to develop? Is it as soon as they're born, or is can you break that down?
Yeah, so the first stage of development completes at 34 weeks gestation, so that's when they're still in utero. Typically, babies are born 38 to 40 weeks. So it's been developing, but that's kind of the first stage. So then when they come out, it's very blurry. They can see black, white, red, and yellow. And then over those first 6 months is when the acuity and color awareness gets better. The visual system continues to develop until 2 years old, and that's more along the lines of visual perception, depth perception, figure ground, things like that. So it definitely refines decently quick and then continues its development over those first 2 years.
How about the physical body? What kind of growth is a baby experiencing in the first 0 to 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? Yeah, I mean, it's wild. It's like the biggest probably change, I would say, as like the 0 to 1 year, I would say is the biggest change a body sees in a lifetime. I'm just saying that offhand. I don't know that for sure. But, babies are usually born 7 pounds is probably the average, 7, 8 pounds, somewhere around there. And typical 1-year-olds are, and this is just physical growth, is, probably 20 to 25 pounds or so, maybe a little less. So you're obviously seeing big physical growth, but from that 0-month time frame, you come out as this little baby that just like withdraws into a flexor pattern, which is where their hands go to their face and their legs tuck up, and they can't do anything.
and they're completely dependent. And then those first 6 months, you see them start to roll, you see them start to pivot on their belly, you see them have full head control, you see them start sitting and interacting with their environment and laughing and smiling and all of that stuff. And then that 6 to 12 month, you see them go from sitting to crawling and crawling around, and then pulling to stand and cruising on furniture and walking and developing their language, where it goes from like no language, just cries, to cooing, to like actual consonants, to then at a year is when you start to get more actual words. And so then that year time frame is when you start to see them walking. And then year 1 to 2, they're walking and exploring their environment. They're developing a lot of words and communication more. They're asserting their independence for sure, developing more emotional awareness and social skills, how to play with others. And they're like these little kids by the time they're 2. So it's wild to really break it down and see these kiddos that, I work with regularly, and I see them then a year later, and you're like, how is that? How are you even the same kid? Or even like 2 months later, they're a whole new kid. So it's really quite fascinating. And I personally think it's one of the most interesting things out there, and like so amazing to see as like a caregiver and parent, and, all of your extended family too. So.
Yeah. The human body fascinates me, of just how it has developed and how it can grow, and just how it can heal itself from injuries, and I'm just blown away. And so to change gears just a little bit, are there any common myths or fears that parents have that you deal with on a regular basis when they're like, oh no, I've got this little human that I'm in charge of, what do I do now?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, I would say the biggest early fears is, am I doing what I should be doing with them? Are they eating enough or eating well? So that's something with therapy that we work on a lot. So the skill of feeding, it is an innate skill, but it is not always the easiest for everyone, and that's okay. So a lot of kids have to learn how to eat better so that they can gain weight. That's a big one. As far as myths go and things like that, there isn't like a ton that I see. One big thing, but it's pretty well explained by the hospital and your pediatrician, but is to put your baby on their back to sleep. So it's called the Back to Sleep campaign, and it was created in the early 90s, and it is babies used to be put on their bellies to sleep. And with the Back to Sleep campaign, it has reduced the occurrences of sudden infant death syndrome by a lot. So a safe sleep environment really is like, it just should be followed to a T, because we want to keep them as safe as possible. So that's a big one, where babies shouldn't be put on their bellies to sleep unless they're getting there themselves. But trying to think of anything else. Yeah, those are the big ones, really.
Again, another fact that just something I never would have thought of, like, hey, this could increase the odds of something really bad happening if you didn't know about it. So fascinating. I'm so glad that there are people out there like you that can help people like me who don't know anything about what they're doing. So I really appreciate it.
But it's so wonderful. Like, that's the best part is, I mean, obviously the babies are great, but working with parents and helping them feel just as confident and comfortable and like in charge of their baby's development themselves. So.
Laurel, I can't thank you enough. As we start to wrap up, there is one question that I like to ask all the guests.
Sure.
And that is, what is one lesson that you've learned in life that you would love to share with all the listeners?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think this is going to sound a little cliche, but being kind to everyone is something that should never go understated. For the world that I've been lucky enough to be a part of with so many people's lives, has also shown me that you never know what people are going through, and what is behind the scenes, or, their day-to-day activities that they have to do because that's what their baby needs, and just bigger life things as well. But being kind to everyone just can't be understated, like, in how important it can be and how big of a difference it can make in other people's daily lives and overall life. So I think it is a little cliche, but it's just, I think, something so important to remember.
That's amazing. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
Laurel, thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, it was amazing. For anyone that's interested in getting in touch with Laurel, I will make sure to include a link down below that will have her website as well as her social media. Go follow her on Instagram. She puts out some great content. I've learned a lot just from your Instagram.
Good.
So, yes, it's been amazing. So, thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a great day.
Yes, you too, Chris. Thank you.